excuse me, I'd like to welcome the Brooklyn Park Osseo Maple Grove group here. And also to remind all of the members that if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I also would like to introduce Marty Micks, who is a very important person. She is, she's the Firearms Safety Update Committee co-chair. And she has also in the past served as president of League of Women Voters Minnesota and is currently president of the League in Golden Valley and secretary of the Council of Metropolitan Area Leagues, that's CMAL. Marty will be speaking on a really vital issue today in Minnesota and in the US. That is the impact of firearms in our communities. And she's had many researchers who have been interviewing sheriffs and police chiefs across Minnesota. Welcome, Marty.
Thank you very much. I think we should thank several people in the ABC League for doing interviews of their police and sheriff. We really appreciate it. You all did such a nice job. Just know that the report that I sent you is really not official from the State League. It was just something they were concerned. It was just the voices of the police and sheriffs. So keeping that in mind, it's just one group, but we were interested in their opinions and also what is going on in the communities. We really learned a lot that the communities can be very, very different. And I will begin a little bit here with I'm going to just share the screen and let's go here. And can you all see the screen okay? Okay, thank you. Which of these statements are true? Now, I don't expect you to answer it right now, but these statements or questions are the ones that our committee had disagreement on. We all had a different knowledge base as we came into the study. So you might all have different views too. So, do mass shootings account for a large percentage of firearms homicides? I should put a question mark for that. Do most mass shootings occur in schools? And is it true that over 90% of cities in Minnesota have no firearm homicides during a given year? Is the rate of firearm violence greater now than it was in the mid-90s? And are most firearm deaths by suicide? Are most police shootings of Black males? So all of these were questions that were brought up, disagreements. We had to do a lot of research to find out the answers. And I'll begin with going to the Gun Violence Archive. This archive is actually very good. They do verify all of the data on deaths and suicides by gun. You'll notice here that over these past few years that there has been an increase in deaths by firearms. And in fact, in the year I should get this out of the way. In the year 2020, it jumped up to 19,000 deaths. Suicides, it takes a while for the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, they don't give that information on suicides until a couple of years later. So that's why it's still pending. And part of it is, if a person kills himself, if it's not clear, sometimes there's a homicide possible investigation. So things like that can slow it down. You'll notice that there's a mass shooting and the mass shootings have increased. It was down 269 in 2014 and then up to 611 in 2020. Now, what makes mass shootings interesting is that, not interesting, but there's a difference in how it is defined. And just recently, the Gun Violence Archive now uses a term mass murders, meaning that 4 or more were killed in an event by a shooter or shooters. The problem with trying to compare data on mass shooting is that if you, let me state, the difference is, one definition is it has to be in a public place. Other definitions are that it does not. And if you look at the mass shootings, most actually occur in the home. Family fights or friends of families, but they usually occur in a home. It's about 53%. Now, if you were to define a mass shooting as occurring in a public place, then you have various venues. It could be bars, restaurants, workplace, school, and workplace seems to, in general, over the years, has been more common with schools after that. But in the year 2019, when I was looking at everything, it seemed like it was because so much was closed down and not all schools were in person, the data pretty much came out almost equal for places of employment or bars or private clubs, et cetera. And defensive gun use, I did look into that, and there is some defensive gun use, but in general, it's people who already know that they're going to have a problem. Like in Minnesota, there were 4 cases in 2019, and one, it was a person, actually they tended to be involved in some criminal elements, and they knew that one side was going to be coming after them, and they were ready to shoot them when they broke into their home or when they drove by the funeral that was being held. Now, this is a cartoon that Mary Louise Grow provided me. It's changed a little bit, like down at the bottom here, it says an abused woman is 6 times more likely to be murdered if there's a gun in the home. That data has changed now. It's only 5 times. I shouldn't say only, but it's one less than it used to be. A gun in the home triples the risk of a homicide. A gun in the home increases the likelihood of suicide 5-fold. And a gun in the home is 22 times more likely to be used in a suicide, homicide, or accident than to be used in self-defense. And a gun in the home is responsible for a vast majority of children killed by firearms. And a gun in the home increases the chances of being killed by firearms 72%. So one has to think about how they store their guns. Is it safe? Minnesota does have a law that you're not supposed to have negligent storage. This chart here is a chart of, can everyone see it? That top bar is a little bit in the way, but gun suicide and homicide rate per 100,000 people in the US. This was from Pew Research. And you'll notice that suicides have started to increase again. They're up to 6.9%, but it's still not as high as it was in '76. And the murder rates have gone up and down. And then you'll see here in the mid-1990s, much, much higher than it is today. And again, these are by firearm. This, though, has jumped up to, I believe it's somewhere around 5.5%, or 5.5 per 100,000 people, or at least it was in 2020. I don't know, haven't done the math for the 2021. Now, this is Minnesota's homicide rate, not very exciting, but again, to show you, this is an overall homicide rate, not firearm homicide rate, but keep in mind that 75% of homicides are by firearm. And the highest rate was in 1995 at 3.9 per 100,000. But you'll notice here, our population, the state's population keeps growing. And so when members of our committee were saying, firearms it's never been worse before, and I'd say, no, the rates are actually not as bad. But you can see that when you go from 4.3 million to 5.7 million, you have a large change in population. So that accounts for the rate being lower, even though it's like 185 homicides in 2020 in Minnesota. Any questions on that? This here is, and can you all see underneath that line at the, can you read the top line? Because I can't when I'm looking at this. What shocked me was this is in Minnesota. The largest number of persons killed by race are African American. Also, it tends to be African American offenders as well as victims. And it took a large leap after 2018 in, it went up, you know, probably about 30%, but then it really jumped in 2020. And the white population did not have as much of a jump, but it was certainly up there. And the Native American indigenous population has actually had their population numbers are smaller, but their percentages, you know, they have a higher death rate. And the Asian population has actually been going down for firearm violence. And the thing that was the biggest shock to me, I knew suicide was certainly an issue. I didn't realize that it is the cause of 77% of the firearm deaths in Minnesota are suicide. Homicides are 19%, and police intervention is 2%. And others can be accidental discharge of a firearm, things like that. So that is, some states actually, they may have a lower suicide rate, but that's only in comparison to their high homicide rate. In general, because our homicide rate is fairly low, our suicide rate appears, you know, much higher. The thing that kind of shocked me was the large difference in suicide rate per 100,000 of white males at 29.8 per 100,000 to down here, you get all the way down to Black females, 2.9%. But you'll notice that the top 4 are all males and the bottom 4 are all females. Males tend to use a firearm more frequently in a suicide. It's in more than half of the suicides that white males take their lives by firearm. Females are more likely to use other methods, but they also don't have as high of a rate of suicide. So the answers to the statements: do mass shooting account for a large percentage of firearm homicides? Depending on the definition, they only account for less than 1% to up to 3% of homicide gun deaths. Most mass shootings are not in schools. Most are actually in the homes. But again, some definitions will not include domestic violence or gang violence. So if you take those out of the equation, you certainly have a lot less mass shootings. But most of them are in the workplace, followed by schools, if you take out domestic violence or gang crime. And it's true that over 90% of cities in Minnesota have no firearm homicides during a given year. In 2020, it was 92%. Obviously, there's a lot of smaller cities, but I didn't include the smallest of the cities when I did that. And is the rate of firearm violence greater now than it was in the mid-1990s? No, even with the current spike, it's less than 1995. However, I'm getting concerned about whether it might be, you know, pretty close to that. And are most firearm deaths by suicide? Yes, 77% are by suicide in Minnesota. Nationally, it's 60%. Are there any questions on that so far? Another thing that was brought up by the state board, as I said, there was nothing about, there was criticism that I didn't talk about the large number of Black males that are killed by police. So I did get the data for 2020, and this law enforcement shootings or use of force, it also includes, you know, like when George Floyd was killed, that would be a loss of consciousness, which would be included in data if it had happened in 2020. So the largest portion is white males, 21, Black 14, unknown race 5, American Indian 3, and Asian 3. Those are just numbers rather than percentages. And the fatalities where they're police shootings, there was one in each of those following counties. And when it says SO, that's Sheriff's Office. If it says PD, that's Police Department. So Blue Earth, Cass County, Carver County, Dakota County, Nicollet County, Pine County, St. Louis County, sheriffs each had one fatality in each of those counties. And Minneapolis PD had one, North Mankato had one, St. Cloud one, and St. Paul one. For wounded, where there had been some exchange of fire between the police and the perpetrators, maybe, the Brooklyn Park was 2, Crystal was 1, Duluth was 1, Minneapolis 1, St. Paul 1, State Patrol 1, and Waseca 1, and Wilmar 1. So that is kind of the impact of the firearms, fatalities and wounds. Then we get to, I'm feeling kind of like is there any questions at all? Otherwise, I will go on to the second largest change since 1990, and that is the Supreme Court cases. The Second Amendment states a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And for 200 years, it was interpreted as a collective right rather than an individual right. The District of Columbia et al. V. Heller in 2008 interpreted this to be an individual right to keep and bear arms, but Heller did not say it was an absolute right. So that would allow for certain persons who would be dangerous to themselves or others not being able to have a firearm. Felons, there's certain, felons after a certain amount of years may be able to get a firearm, but in general, for I think it's 10 years that they cannot get a firearm. McDonald versus the City of Chicago court case extended that individual right to keep and bear arms to all state and local laws. One thing to keep in mind that's coming up soon is that the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association Incorporated versus Bruin. Bruin is the state's attorney general. They will decide whether New York State has the right to require that a person show a need for protection to carry a concealed weapon outside the home. Now, in New York, since 1913, a permit to carry, you had to show that you needed protection to get that permit to carry. In Minnesota, we don't have to show that particular right. But if that court case goes against the state of New York, that court case could then throw out a lot of previous laws, which would normally be accepted through precedent. Major federal firearms laws since 1990, the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act of 1993 has made a big change. It required federal background checks to purchase a firearm from a federally licensed dealer. You'll notice I underlined that because it doesn't say if you get a gun from any other source, but it's through a federally licensed dealer, and anyone else that sells it does not have a license. This act set up the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, and it's maintained by the FBI. So like if someone goes into Fleet Farm to buy a rifle, they can do the background check. It takes a couple of minutes. They just plug in the information into the NICS. Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994 was a large bill that addressed many crime issues. It had a lot of anti-violence funds. It had increases in police, and it also banned semi-automatic assault weapons. and made it unlawful to transfer or possess large capacity ammunition magazines for 10 years. This part of the act was not renewed and it expired in 2004. One thing I did learn is that about a year after the act passed, various manufacturers were looking at what specifically was banned, and then they altered their firearms to make them not fall under that exact definition that was provided by the government. So, and then they were sending in parts to the US. So it basically, the ban was really just a year, but overall crime went down. There was a lot more impact of some of the violence prevention funds. Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act of 2005 prohibited gun manufacturers and dealers from being named in civil lawsuits when crimes are committed involving their firearms. One little interesting thing right now is the Mexico has only one firearm dealer in the whole country, yet their country is flooded with so many guns that are on the streets, creating high crime. So Mexico is suing the gun manufacturers, and it will be interesting to see if how this court case will be handled. Minnesota firearm law since 1990, the negligent storage of firearms made it a gross misdemeanor for a person to store or leave a loaded firearm where a child under 18 years is likely to gain access, and requires dealers to post signs about it. You know, the state of Michigan, where that teen had access to the gun, the parents actually had bought it for him, but they didn't have it stored properly, even though Michigan requires that you have a lock box for your firearms when you purchase them, but they didn't have a law that it was, you know, that it's a misdemeanor to store or leave a loaded firearm where a child under 18 is going to get access. Permit to purchase is required in Minnesota to purchase either a handgun or a semi-automatic military style assault weapon. That actually has saved a lot of lives in our state, because not everybody can pass that background check to purchase a semi-automatic military style assault weapon. Some states don't even require that. The Brady handgun bill, of course, requires all handguns to have a background check, but our state has taken the extra step of that permit to purchase for both handgun and the military style assault weapons. And of course, the Minnesota Personal Protection Act of 2003 allowed persons eligible to possess a handgun to apply for this permit, which allows the permit holder to take their gun with them to all places that don't expressly forbid guns. And since 2015, over 358,897 Minnesotans have acquired permits to carry. And I think I'm supposed to add about another 100,000 that were just acquired this year. I just saw some statistics and I forgot to change this slide. The technologies of firearms have changed also since the 1990s. They're becoming more versatile, more accurate, more deadly, and more affordable. To the right there, you see a 3D printed gun, and you can actually probably make the gun for less than $300 or $400. Now, we also have technologies that make firearms safer, such as smart guns that fire only if used by an authorized owner. But those would require a thumbprint, and some people are concerned that, you know, sometimes that thumbprint doesn't get recognized right away, and they're afraid that they would lose that capacity for a quick firing of their firearm. There's also drop safety, so guns won't fire if dropped accidentally. But and this is the wording from the other committee member. There's been resistance by gun owners who see them as intrusive. I think the issue was that they didn't really like that thumbprint one. They didn't think it'd always be working. Special use gun developed by Israel in 2003 for the special forces was that corner shot technology, which is a little scary. You can see on the left there, it's straight shot, but on the soldier on the right, he's actually, you can't see them there. That rifle can actually turn the corner so that they can shoot without being seen. This one on the right, there was some criticism about having this in our report. There was a company that called the Culper Company, and they marketed this Glock, and they put real Legos on the outside. It was just a kind of a gimmick, but then the Lego toy company objected and the gun was no longer marketed. But can you imagine if you had a little kid in the house and you actually had a gun like that? They would not know that it wasn't a toy. We do have a lobby group that's working to impede the enforcement of new gun laws, and it's the gunowners.min sanctuary. They're trying to get Second Amendment sanctuary counties, townships, and cities, or other localities in Minnesota that have adopted any resolutions or ordinance to prohibit or impede the enforcement of unconstitutional gun control legislation, such as universal background checks, red flag laws, assault weapon bans, magazine restrictions, or other metro-driven anti-gun policies at the state legislature. There are several counties that actually have signed on to this, so it'd be interesting to see if we had, stricter gun laws, how many of these various counties would enforce them. I think, I guess we'll find out. This is about our, I apologize. Have I been talking all this time and not knowing it? And not knowing that I was muted? I can't hear anybody.
No, we just lost you when you went to this new slide, Marty.
Oh, good. The Dickey Amendment in 1996 essentially stopped gun violence research by prohibiting the Centers for Disease Control funding research directed toward advocacy for gun control. So this caused researchers to back off the issue altogether for fear of losing funding. So it didn't specifically prohibit them, but they were concerned that if there was research that would show that any advocacy for gun control, that this would just be, eliminate their ability to do any further research. And after 23 years without giving money for gun violence research, Congress in 2019 allocated $25 million for gun violence research. And let's see here. Now, this is an interesting thing. This is from a UN global study of crime. And I found it fascinating because it kind of rung true. I think some of you, I see are teachers in the group as well as me. But when there is a high crime in the area and the kids are dealing with a lot of issues that make them feel not safe, it affects their ability to be ready to learn. So, as you have more homicides, this negative impact on schooling reduces then chances of the children getting a high quality education. And then that in fact turns and causes the decrease in your employment opportunities, and it further reduces our resilience to crime and victimization. So you get this poor education and homicide do have a link. And, just as we knew 30 years ago that kids need to be fed, they also need to feel safe in their schools, in their homes, in their community. And this I found very interesting. It's called the rule of law, making the vicious circle virtuous. On the left-hand side, you see the vicious circle. And we have somewhat been going through that here in Minnesota for the last couple of years, ever since certainly COVID is a factor. And after the killing of George Floyd and then Daunte Wright, it is reducing the trust with the police. And when you reduce that, there are getting to be more crimes that they wouldn't go to the police to tell them, information that would be needed. So there would be less people caught. And if, you can get away with it, then there's more increases in homicide. And the more people that are going into the court system, it is overstretched the capacity of the criminal system. So they're letting people that they think might not cause a big problem back on the streets. And we're getting, more people that, the police will say that some people, they've actually arrested them in the morning and they're back on the streets at night. So that's kind of a weak rule of law. And then the way to strengthen it, to get the virtuous circle, is to strengthen the rule of law, which also includes building trust with the police and reforms that might be needed. Anything that can help the community feel that the police and the community are working together. Then you can have then you have less people getting away with crimes because there's shared information, and then the homicide rates will go down because much of every murder that you might be having in Minneapolis, there's usually a revenge that comes soon after. So you can lower the homicides, and then there's more efficient criminal justice system because then the courts won't be so overwhelmed. Evidence-based violence reduction strategies and programs. I found that, sometimes this can get overwhelming, but reading some of the research I found really kind of positive to look at firearm violence as a public health issue, and that it's a contagion that must be traced and interpreted. There have been studies showing that if you dig down into all the areas where there is gun violence, it's not a whole community, but there are a few people connected in networks that those networks also link from Minneapolis to St. Paul to Brooklyn Park to, various areas where you don't realize that they're all connected, but they are. And it's not necessarily gangs. So that's the thing that is a little different than it used to be, but with the connections to the internet, all the social media strategies, people do get to know each other. School-based violence prevention strategies. I worked at a school that was having problems with gang violence, and it was amazing that Brooklyn Park and the police were giving money to the school. We also got a 21st century grant to have after-school programs for the kids. And within about a year and a half to 2 years, I didn't see any kids that were in gangs. I think there was just one that I happened to know about. The others, the school changed so nicely because the kids said, in fact, I asked them why things were changing. They said, because we're making friends after school. And they were also improving their education because the kids were doing maybe as step dancing or basketball, but then they'd also go to math tutoring or English. And so they got a little bit of their energy out right after school, a little exercise. They got, things to drink and food to eat and, snack stuff. And then they'd settle down and doing their schoolwork. So it was really a wonderful thing to see. And I would like to see more schools do it. The bottom three are actually from the UN recommendations that there should be family support and counseling to reduce violence in the home between partners and reduce child abuse and homicides. Because one of the top reasons for a young child dying is actually their parents, one of the parents killing them. Reducing the number of illegally held firearms. Right now, we've got a lot of illegally held firearms, whether they are ghost guns, which are untraceable. And, you can buy kits where you've got the receivers, not the receivers, well, they might be 80% done. And because if it's not a completed receiver, it's not considered a firearm. So the question now that legal be posed at the council is to recognize ghost guns as a firearm. And then programs to get young males in schools, vocational training or employment to reduce homicide. That is really an essential thing because so many young men are dying, because they are getting involved in firearm violence. And it's important for for young people to be either in school or having vocational training or having a job. So it gives them something to do, networks, and gives them, gives them a more positive outlook. I talked a mile a minute.
Okay, so we have some questions in the chat, I believe. Let's see here.
Oh, good.
What is the given rationale that the lobby that opposes universal background checks gives? Do you know?
Yeah, a little bit. The concern is that, what is it going to cover? Is it going to cover people who are selling, or let's say, would it cover grandpa giving his rifle to his grandson? Or is this going to be an issue where it's going to cause an extra cost for monitoring sales at gun shows? However, I've talked to, some police said, it's not that hard to actually have, actually in one of the gun dealers here in town said that it's not that hard to just do a background check for other people that might want to be selling their guns, because quite often at gun shows, people will bring their own firearms to sell. But that would be one way to check up on the background. So the issue is it really a problem? If the gun dealer doesn't think it's a problem, I probably think it's not a problem, but who am I to say?
Then a second question is from Wes, as he says, the sanctuary slide, they listed a number of policies they consider unconstitutional.
Yeah.
Have there been any court cases challenging things like permits and background checks that don't prevent ownership of firearms, but put purchase under rules / guidelines or limit certain persons from ownership at the time, and finding those things to be unconstitutional? Well, that's a lot. Do you understand that?
I don't know that I'm going to see if I can read this. Okay. I see it right here.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't have Florence Bragg here because she was the expert in all the court cases. There is the one court case I talked about, the New York Rifle Club, Rifle and Pistol Club against the state of New York, Bruin. And that is challenging their permits to carry. So, some states are now pushing, there's a group who are pushing for no permit needed to carry, that everybody can carry.
Really?
So I know that police associations are not happy about that. But there's some southern states that already are trying to get that implemented. But right now in Minnesota, you have to pass a background check to have a permit to carry.
Yeah. And Mary Jo Truncheon has a question, but it's limited here. What is that? Mary Jo, can you just ask your question? Mary Jo, can you unmute and ask your question? I don't think so.
She's muted.
Okay,
So,
are there any other questions?
I think I hear her now.
I have a
Okay.
question. Yes.
Okay.
I was interested in one of the solutions, which was like vocational training.
Yeah.
And I know high schools, as society has become more complicated, high schools don't always have good vocational training, but we do have good vocational schools like the Anoka Technical School. And I was wondering why high schools don't more promote those programs. Couldn't we have like a PSEO program for students who might do better in a vocational or tech school like Anoka. Um, the times may have changed, but it used to be in our local high school, PSEO programs weren't really encouraged because when they lost the student, they lost the money that went along with that student. So sometimes counselors weren't really directing them to even PSO programs, let alone to a vocational, path. And it seems
I
to
should
me,
explain, PSEO is post-secondary education options that students can take in high school, starting, I believe, sophomore or junior year at a college.
and that if that seems to help the situation with young males and females, why isn't that being used and supported?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of decision makers on that one. School boards can make that decision. The state of Minnesota has certain requirements, and they keep increasing more of the things you need to graduate from high school, and some of them, they may not be able to get some of those electives that get them interested in these VOTEC things. And also much of the VOTEC stuff now that I know, like in Osseo schools, it's computer information, because that's where a lot of the jobs are, is in computer stuff. But you think about look at all the housing. We have a shortage of housing, and we also have a shortage of people who can build, plumbers, electricians, carpenters. You're still needed.
Mhm. Okay, here's another question from Julie. Marty, can you define red flag laws for the audience?
Red flag laws are extreme risk protection orders. They're called ERPOs, as well as red flag laws. And this has just been done in some of the states. It's not very common throughout the country. But what it basically says, if you are considered a danger to yourself or to others, it gives the law enforcement the ability to remove the guns from the home. Now, that had a little bit of mixed reaction from law enforcement, because some were saying this can be a very highly dangerous thing to do. And they would rather see this being encouraged, that you encourage your family member to have the gun stored elsewhere, it's not an easy one to legislate, especially in Minnesota, when you have we have the mixed legislature of Republicans and Democrats. But still, I think it does kind of, some get concerned about infringing on the rights of the individual. And, there should be some kind of look into how we can make it safe, and how we can engage with the person who is, becoming a danger, and, how to handle that.
Okay. And this from Paul Sitz. I looked up firearm deaths versus COVID deaths, and the current COVID death rate far exceeds the firearm death rate. Marty, do you know this? How do traffic deaths and drug and alcohol deaths compare?
I happen to know that traffic deaths actually were slightly less than firearm deaths most recently. However, drug overdose deaths went over 100,000 this past year. And that has been, it is really, if we're really looking at how to reduce deaths, we should really go at the drug overdose issues and drug addiction. It's very sad. And of course, I'm just for the study, we're looking at firearms, but certainly the drug issue is huge.
Okay, and this is also from Wes. I know that nearby Elk River High School has a firearms safety course available. I'm not aware of such in the Anoka Hennepin School District. Do many area schools offer such courses in their high schools? Do you know, Marty?
That I don't know. I do know that one thing that through our, interviews is that some of the, police, especially the sheriffs, were saying, hey, to get a hunting license, you have to go through a training. And I think that there was even a police chief who was saying he wanted kids to go through a training so that they could see that this is not, just a computer game, that this has real life consequences when you shoot off a gun. And one of my neighbor's son just got his firearm training certificate for hunting. And, he had an 8-hour program, is online. And then the dad had to also work with him and verify that he had, watched him handle the rifle, et cetera. So he said it was not easy. And, but he felt kind of more proud that he'd passed it and he did the work. And so he's, hopefully going to be very responsible.
Okay. Joan says BSAs usually offer firearms training. What is that? Boy Scouts of America? Joan? Yes. Okay.
Yes, you're right, Deanne.
Okay.
I had to find my unmute.
Yeah.
Okay.
And National Rifle has, various certification courses. And there's another company, oh my gosh, I forget the name of it, but they also offer liability insurance as well. That's for people who are getting their certificates for permit to carry. So in case they.
Okay, here's an interesting question from Pat Kennedy. For your statistics on shooting, what was your source of statistics? The Guardian and the New York Times projects demonstrated severe underreporting of officer-involved shootings in official statistics. Have you heard about that?
I hear about it, but all I can talk about is Minnesota. And Minnesota, there are some states that are they're not as good about reporting to the FBI. They're not as trustful. That Minnesota is much better. They're in the 90s. I think it's like 93% of their agencies are reporting to they actually report to the BCA, and then the BCA reports to the FBI.
Okay. And it seems that Mary Jo Truncheon, you've got to unmute yourself, Mary Jo, and you can ask your question. Here you go.
There you are. Okay, I was for many years a licensed firearms safety instructor with Anoka County 4-H, and we had maybe one of the best programs in the state here in Anoka County, but the schools in around here wouldn't allow us to teach in the school after school. So these programs could have been more available, but the schools wouldn't allow us to do the firearm safety training in the school. So there's a problem there. I mean, I think that our programs really helped young people be much more responsible with guns. We weren't teaching anyone to hunt or that sort of thing. It was all about safety. I was actually the archery instructor, but my husband was teaching some of the gun stuff. So we were mystified why we couldn't have these programs in the regular school. We had them at the Armory, we had them at Bunker Hills, in the park, but they couldn't reach maybe kids who needed this kind of safety training very well.
I don't know if Marty has an answer to that.
The only thing I can think of is that, schools can make rules that, no firearms in the school.
This was after
And
school.
I think that might be, even a squirt gun became a no-no. We were told we could not have squirt guns at the school. Not that we had them, but I mean, with the kids, you know, in the last day of school might have their squirt guns. And that was not allowed because anything that was a gun of any sort was a no-no.
Some of the policies that we have currently are just, they kind of go against the positive things we could be doing for
Yeah.
young people. That's
Okay, I have a question. I read your survey and I saw some of the answers between the sheriffs and police departments and rural and urban areas. And it seems that one of the problems is there is not enough personnel to do background checks. So some of the sheriffs or police departments had an opposition to that because they didn't have the personnel. Is that what you were hearing too, Marty?
Yeah, I mean, there was, some said that they could handle it, you know, like Hennepin County, yeah, we can handle all these extra permits. But it was very difficult for some of the counties that, you know, they only had a few staff members. In fact, I think, yeah, some counties actually in the metro area were having a problem. And, you know, the city council only allocates a certain amount of budget time. So then what would happen is that you had to have, like, if it's the sheriff's office, they have to give a response within 30 days as to whether the person can have a permit. And what they were finding is they, even if they were denying and they had reasons for denial, they would then, the applicant would appeal to the courts and then the judges would say, sure, you can have the gun. So they were getting frustrated with the judges being so lenient that they thought, oh, what the heck, you know? And this was in more than 5 interviews. So that is an issue with the courts as well.
Yeah. Well, we have some comments here too, not necessarily questions.
Okay.
Betsy says Anoka County 4-H did have an excellent firearm safety program. Both of their boys were in this program. And, oh, here, I lost my chat. Hold on just a minute. Yeah, and well, there's some other comments. Some schools have target shooting clubs and competitions, and
Right.
there are several Minnesota schools that have trap shooting teams. And
think
we're
Rossville
about
has
ready
it.
to wrap up here. So Marty, do you have any conclusive comments you'd like to add?
Well, I think it's telling that when we talk to the police to find out, you know, what kinds of guns were used in crimes, basically, a lot of crimes that when they're committing a crime, it's not with a gun that they legally own, you know, so that's the issue.
okay.
Or the gun is one of those that's untraceable. It's but you know, and I think that shows that there's an awful lot now that's falling through the cracks, that our current laws are not able to keep up with the latest, you know, such as like ghost guns, where you can buy these kits online, and obviously they're supposed to do background checks, but you know, they may not.
Yeah.
I should take that back. They actually don't have to do a background check for an online unfinished unfinished firearms. If you buy a gun online, yes, that's supposed to be happening, because it would be a federally licensed dealer.
Well, thank you for your presentation, Marty. I learned a lot, and I think a lot of other people did too. So thank you so much for giving your presentation. Thank you.
And I'll
Bye-bye.
see you all at council, where we're going to get a chance to at least maybe update our position on 3 items.
Oh, would you tell us about that?
There will be one that we are changing the background check to universal background checks, meaning that it would be all transactions,
Okay.
And of course, knowing legislation, that gives room for legislators to play around with that, because, you know, if it's between family members, that might be a very different thing than when it's between people that are meeting at a party that really don't know each other.
And I saw at one time the state would like to get this out again by 2025 and
Oh,
in
as
talking
soon
to
as-
you,
as soon as
Marty,
you
you
can.
said that's been changed, right?
Yes, yes. We have done the research. What they want to do is they want to look more through a DEI lens and hear from different communities. And so that's something that we can probably have, like panel discussions, things like that. They could be recorded that league members could, attend via webinar or some such
Okay.
thing. And
And I want to just interrupt again, just to clarify that the League of Women Voters hasn't taken any formal positions on the information you've presented. You're just presenting the facts that you've researched, so all of us can be
Thank you.
informed based on facts instead of opinions.
yes, thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate that, Julie.
Yeah, so all the slides were based on research and facts.
Yes, yes,
And not opinions. Okay.
thank
And
you.
I think that's important for all of us because of the assumptions. You started out with all the assumptions that people may have or things that we think and showed how most of those weren't accurate. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think it was really helpful that you presented a program that just, helped us focus on what is facts. And then we can think about, now that we know these facts, are we in a good place or not with how we handle things in Minnesota?
yeah. And I've noticed too, like certain, like Brooklyn Park has actually given 1.2 million, I think, for violence intervention groups to reduce the violence in the community. And it appears that it's having some impact.
Good.
And I understand this Saturday, your program, the League of Women Voters CMAL program on livable communities, will also be broadcast by QCTV. And so,
Wonderful.
or rebroadcast, so it'll be filmed and then rebroadcast, because that's another topic that's of interest to people that live in this area is what is that program all about? And there are some real strong opinions, pro and con about the program, mostly con. So I think just learning more about it through League of Women Voters helps people collect the facts so they can formulate better informed opinions and decisions. So I think you've done a great job tonight. And Deanna, this has been a wonderful program. And I think that's we're at a great point to conclude this evening's program. So thank you for
Thank you.
informing us.
Thank you.